Really delighted today to move past the snapshot of the Commission, which we had last week, to exploring the European Council and the Council of Ministers. This week is an exploration in the true extent of the webinar flexibility, in that we're going to be, first of all, joined by Professor Yuri de Vost, who's a VUB professor and also a senior fellow here at the Institute for European Studies. Yuri has been pre-recorded, but he's also going to be joining us for Q&A because he's currently in Portugal. So we're going to have that session first, and then live in the studio, as they say, we have Gosia Gorska, Policy Officer from DG Humanitarian Aid at the European Commission, who has graciously consented to do the second half of the European Council webinar. So it will be a two-tier webinar today, with me doing the introduction, moving over to Yuri, and then about 30 minutes after that, moving over to Gosia as well. After that, we'll have some time for Q&A, but also we can always have the chat room, which is open and ready to take your questions. So without further ado, I'm going to move over now to Yuri.
Hello, I'm Yuri de Vost of the Institute for European Studies here at Vrije Universiteit Brussel, and I will be talking about the European Council segment of today's webinar. And the starting point of our webinar is a declaration by the President of the European Parliament of only a couple of weeks ago. On the 25th of April 2012, Martin Schulz said in a meeting with the European Commission, "In the past few months, we have witnessed a disturbing trend towards renationalization and Summitization. The heads of state and government are arrogating more and more decisions to themselves, debating and taking decisions behind closed doors and in disregard of the community method." And we will take this statement as the starting point for our discussion about the summits of heads of state, heads of government that are called European Council meetings. And how are we going to look at this? Well, I propose that we take it in 6 different segments or 6 different stages. First of all, we will briefly look at the historical development of these European councils. Then, second point, we will take a look at their composition. Thirdly, we will discuss the frequency of these European Council meetings. Fourthly, we will briefly look at the functions, the political tasks of the European Council. Then we will move to the decision-taking method of the European Council. And finally, we will discuss a number of problem points in the function of such European Council meetings. So, first of all, historical background, historical development of the European Council. And as you can see on the slide that is currently being shown, there are several stages to be distinguished in the development of these European Council summit meetings between heads of state, heads of government of the EU member states. Starting point, maybe it's useful to recall the history of the creation of the community method referred to by Martin Schulz in his statement that we read at the beginning of this presentation. As you probably recall from previous webinars, the European communities were founded in large measure in some kind of a reaction against the intergovernmental paralysis that characterized organizations like the Organization for European Economic Cooperation in Paris or the Council of Europe in Strasbourg. These organizations turned out to be very interesting, important fora for discussion, but they were really unable to bring about a general European unification dynamic. And why were they unable to bring about this unification dynamic? Well, first of all, because they lacked a common starting point for the political discussions. Secondly, because for all important political matters, they needed unanimous decisions. And thirdly, also, because these organizations were unable to turn out binding secondary law that would be compelling on the member states. And so these elements, these weaknesses of the traditional intergovernmental organizations inspired the community method, inspired the system set up by the three European communities in the 1950s. And these communities, of course, have, first of all, a common starting point for legislative discussions. The European Commission has the exclusive right to take the initiative, and as the European Commission needs to work in the general interest. Secondly, within the framework of the communities, within the Council of Ministers, decisions can be made by majority voting, qualified majority voting, and this will be discussed in the second part of this webinar. Thirdly, within the framework of the community method, binding secondary law is the outcome of the decision making, with the Commission acting as the guardian of the treaties, able to bring member states that do not comply with the legislation before the European Court of Justice. And moreover, this entire decision-making system happens under the democratic control of the European Parliament that can even sack the European Commission by adopting a motion of censure. Now, for General de Gaulle, the French president who came to power in 1958 in France, this entire community system, community decision-making system with its supranational institutions, was really a horror. De Gaulle came to power in 58, the year when the European Economic Community starts to function, but he had not been negotiating the treaties. He found the treaties on his desk when he entered the Élysée Palace. And being a strong proponent of intergovernmentalism, believing really that the strong point of Europe were strong nation states, and that it was only through this collaboration between independent, strong nation states that Europe could advance, de Gaulle started proposing a new system of European decision-making, turning around heads of state and heads of government. Now, in the original construction of the European communities, no meetings had been foreseen between heads of state, heads of government. And when de Gaulle looked at the treaties of Rome, he said, hey, where is my place in this entire construction? He said, only the heads of state and heads of government have the necessary legitimacy to determine the broad political guidelines that should steer this European construction. And so, in 1961, de Gaulle, for the first time, brought together the heads of state, heads of government of the 6 EC, European Community member states at the time. And this was followed in the 1960s by a couple of irregular summit meetings. Not even every year did a summit meeting take place. It was only in 1974, and this is then the next stage on the same slide there, when Valéry Giscard d'Estaing became the president of France in 1974. It was at this stage that these summit meetings became more regular features in the political life of the European communities. For Giscard d'Estaing, and he was supported in this effort by the German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt. For Giscard and for Schmidt, it was very important to give much more political guidance to the development of the European Union, and this against the background of what had happened in 1973, the year before when in October there was the war between Israel and the Arab neighbors and the resulting oil prices. And basically European countries had reacted not at all as a unit. They had reacted in a disparate ways. And for Giscard and for Schmidt, one of the main reasons of this lack of unity in European reaction was the fact that there had been no guidance from the top, that heads of state, heads of government had been insufficiently implied in European decision making. They wanted to do something about it, and they decided in Paris, in what was the last of those irregular summit meetings in December of 1974, to start meeting regularly, minimum 3 times per year. And so in 1975 in Dublin, we had the first of these more regular, more solemn European Council meetings. But still, European Council at that time was not yet foreseen in the treaties. They met, heads of state, heads of government met in accordance with what had been agreed in Paris, but nowhere was the place of the heads of government, heads of state foreseen in the treaties. It was only 12 years after his decision in December 1974 that in the Single European Act, European Council was introduced as a political body, however, still a little bit outside of the scope of the European communities. It was recognized as a political body, but not as a formal European community institution, which made the role, which limited, in a certain sense, the role also of the European Council, as it could not really take decisions within the framework of the European communities, as the European Council was not a European community institution in the strict sense. To see the European Council as a formal institution of the European Union with its own real decision-taking powers, we had to wait for the Treaty of Lisbon, the next stage in our historical development. The Lisbon Treaty was signed in 2007, entered into force at the end of 2009, and since the end of 2009, we have the European Council as a formal decision-taking institution within the framework of the European Union. Now, it's not by coincidence that the European Council was, let's say, elevated to the level of a formal EU institution in the framework of the Lisbon Treaty. As you probably know, the Lisbon Treaty was prepared by a European Convention in 2002-2003, and this European Convention was, of course, chaired by Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, the person who was also instrumental in 1974 in the creation of the European Council itself. And so, as the chairman of the European Convention, he struggled, he maneuvered in order to give his child of 1974 a more stable, a more institutional position within this European. A last development in our historical evolution here is something that took place this year in 2012, in March 2012, when the heads of state and heads of government of 25 of the 27 EU member states signed this new intergovernmental treaty called Treaty on Stability, Coordination and Governance in the Economic and Monetary Union. Treaty signed on the 2nd of March 2012, not signed, however, by the United Kingdom and the Czech Republic, but important for our purpose here, summit meetings, heads of state and heads of government meetings, is that this treaty, for the first time, formalizes separate meetings between the heads of state and heads of government of those member states that have adopted the euro as the single currency. And of course, the need to have such euro summits, as they are called in the treaty, was felt, especially in the framework of the crisis currently taking place in the euro area. And the very first time that such a euro summit was gathered was under the leadership of President Sarkozy in 2008 during the French presidency of the Council. But then it met in 2008, it met in 2010, 2011, totally informally, without any mentioning the treaties, and so now, with this new Treaty on Stability, Coordination and Governance in Economic and Monetary Union, these Euro summits finally also got a formal place somewhere in the treaty framework. So far, the historical development. Let's now move to the composition of the European Council. Maybe I should even have said this. So we are with the composition of the European Council now. Of course, I've already mentioned very briefly that it's composed of heads of state and heads of government of the member states. Whether a member state is sending a president or a prime minister or a chancellor, that depends entirely on the constitutional structure of the member states. In general, one can say that the people who are meeting in the European Council are the highest political leaders of the member states. No kings, no queens around the table of the European Council. In addition to the heads of state and heads of government, also a formal member is the president of the European Commission. Now, this was not really evident because at the time of President de Gaulle, 1960s, when de Gaulle was organizing these irregular summits, the president of the Commission was never invited. De Gaulle regarded the Commission as a supranational institution with great suspicion, didn't want it to be involved in intergovernmental decision-taking. Since the European Council was more formalized with regular meetings starting in 1975, the European Commission President has always been present and has played a very useful role, mostly as a conciliator between member states' point of views. Then, a novelty, since the entry into force of the Treaty of Lisbon, we also have, as a member of the European Council, the President of the European Council. This is a new function created by the Treaty of Lisbon, and the first person selected for the function was the former Belgian Prime Minister Herman van Rompuy. Now, the President of the European Council is elected by the European Council for a period of 2.5 years, renewable once. And Van Rompuy actually just started now his second mandate as European Council President. The person in question may not at the same time hold a national office. So he cannot or she cannot at the same time be a president or a prime minister. Full-time task devoted to preparing, sharing, ensuring the follow-up also of European Council meetings. Other tasks of the President of the European Council are reporting after each session to the European Parliament. There is some kind of debate in the European Parliament after each of the European Council sessions. And also, the President of the European Council ensures the external representation of the European Union at his level, at the level of the Presidents, with respect to the common foreign and security policy. And he does this in tandem with the Commission President, who is in charge of external representation in the old European community matters. Let's say trade policy, environmental policy, fisheries, and so on. Those matters are taken care of by the Commission President. Another change marking the entry into force of the Treaty of Lisbon is that the ministers of foreign affairs, who always used to be present around the table of the European Council in the past, are no longer there. They can be called upon to be present when the agenda so requires, says the treaty. In practice, since the Treaty of Lisbon entered into force, there has only been one European Council meeting where the ministers of foreign affairs have been present, and that was a special European Council session devoted to the place of the European Union in the world. Not formal members of the European Council, but very often participating, are the High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, is in fact always taking part in the work, and very often invited is also the President of the European Central Bank. Whenever issues related to monetary policy, macroeconomic policy are on the table, the President of the European Central Bank will also be invited. Let's now move to the frequency of meetings. The Treaty of Lisbon specifies that the European Council should meet twice every 6 months, and when the situation so requires. So we have at least 4 regular European Council meetings per year. Plus then, this treaty that we've looked at in our historical overview, Treaty on Stability, Coordination and Governance in Economic and Monetary Union, this provides for at least 2 Euro summits per year. So in total there, we already have a practical obligation of 6 summit meetings per year. Now, the ambition of President Herman Van Rompuy goes further, and he has proposed immediately after taking office, in the beginning of 2010, he proposed already to organize 10 meetings per year. Why did he want to do that? Because he wanted the European Council to become the government of Europe, especially in economic matters, especially in these times of financial economic crisis. And in fact, what we see when we look at the number of meetings in 2011, for instance, is that we are getting very close to Van Rompuy's initial ambition of having 10 meetings per year, if you count, and regular European Council meetings, and also Euro summits. Then the functions. And I will be quite brief here with respect to the political tasks, the functions of the European Council. In the Treaty of Lisbon, one finds the European Council, since it is now a formal decision-taking institution, one finds it all in several chapters, in several treaty titles. But the main guidance is provided in Article 15 of the Treaty of European Union, and this is really the treaty article you would need to look at if you want to look at what is the treaty saying about the European Council. Look at Article 15 of the Treaty on European Union. Well, it says there that the European Council should provide the EU with the necessary impetus for its development, and that it should also define the general political directions and priorities of the Union's development. In practice, this means that practically all, what you could say, history-making decisions in the European Union are taken at the level of the European Council. Major changes in the EU treaties, they begin and they end at the level of the heads of state, heads of government. The enlargement process also, determining which countries are formal candidate countries, and then also at the end closing the negotiations with a candidate country and turning it into an accession country, an accession state. It's also done at the level of the heads of state, heads of government. The European Council is also a very important player in the determination of the multi-annual financial perspectives, the multi-annual financial framework of the European Union, setting the budget ceilings for several years in the future, also done at the level of heads of state, heads of government. And these are just a number of examples. You can say everything at the level of history-making decisions belongs to the European Council. What has been the focus of President Van Rompuy in the last 3 years, let's say, has of course been the economic crisis and the necessity for the European Union to give a reply to what was happening in the financial markets, in the various Euro states that were in trouble. And Van Rompuy says, well, when we are in situations where the treaties can no longer provide real guidance, when we should go beyond what is really written in the treaties, when we enter in what he said in one of his speeches, when we enter Neuland, then we need the guidance of the heads of state, heads of government. Then the only institution in the European Union that can provide a way out going beyond the existing treaties would be the European Council. And this is, of course, also then why within the framework of the European Council, Merkel, Sarkozy, Van Rompuy, and so on, have been talking about either the European Council or the Euro summits, limited to those member states having adopted the euro as the single currency, as the future or current economic government of the Union. A task that the European Council may not fulfill is legislative functions. For the making of EU law, regulations, directives, and so on, there, when the member states enter into the game, it's for the Council of Ministers to take the decisions, not for the European Council. The European Council has no legislative functions. Decision making, next point. In principle, the European Council takes its decisions by consensus. What is consensus? Basically means that there is a decision unless one of the participants around the table objects to it. And this means then that every member of the European Council can veto a European Council decision. In practice, we see that, as in the case in many traditional intergovernmental fora, discussion fora, decisions are prepared in large measure by the bigger member states. In this case, especially in the euro crisis case, decisions prepared in advance by Germany and by France. And they put their ideas on the table, and then those are basically the strong guidelines around which a consensus must be found with the other member states. What happens when there is a veto? Well, what we see is that on a number of smaller issues like finding the seat of a European community or a European Union agency and so on, when there is a veto, things are blocked. When very important aspects of economic, political life in the Union are at stake, then there has been a tendency, especially during the euro crisis, to circumvent vetoes by going forward with those member states willing to subscribe to the decision. And one of the examples is this treaty that we've already mentioned on governance of the Economic and Monetary Union, which was subscribed to by all heads of state except UK and the Czech Republic. Then we are nearing the end now of the presentation. Having taken a look at the main functions of the European Council, having taken a look at the decision-making system in the European Council, what are some of the problem points in its decision-making system? And here it's interesting to refer again to the community method. Remember, community method, the European Commission takes the initiative and makes proposals for EU legislation from the perspective of the general interest. Well, this is absolutely not the case at the level of the European Council. The starting point for discussion in the European Council are basically 27 different national viewpoints. And then the idea is to reconcile those 27 national viewpoints around the table, or secretly maybe in smaller clubs, preparing European Council meetings. But the starting point is not the general interest. It's not like we have in the normal community method system. Then decision-taking itself, we've seen its consensus, with each member state having a veto right. Of course, this requires a lot of time for reconciliation. Also explaining in large degree why, for instance, during the Euro crisis, the European Union went ahead step by step, slow step by slow step, reaching low-level solutions each time, because they needed to have everybody on board, or else they would move outside of the European Union framework into intergovernmental solutions next to the European Union, as we've had with the Treaty on Governance in Economic and Monetary Union. As far as the implementation of European Council decisions is concerned, well, this has proven to be somewhat difficult, because European Council conclusions are either non-legally binding, they're political commitments, but they are not legally binding. One cannot go before the European Court of Justice to enforce European Council conclusions. Or, if they are not in the format of political commitments that are not legally binding, then they take the form of treaties. And such treaties must be ratified in each of the member states. And that's also a difficult hurdle to overcome, because it means that national parliaments must agree. Not always a very secure prospect when the heads of state, heads of governments take a decision in the European Council. Finally, so in addition to the fact that we do not have common starting points for the discussion based on the general interest, in addition to the fact that we do not move forward by majority voting, but that we need consensus, in addition to the fact that the implementation of European Council decisions is somewhat difficult, we have also a problem of democratic accountability. Because decisions, while decisions within the framework of the European Council are of course taken at the European Union level, there is no European Union level democratic accountability for this decision taking. Of course, each of the heads of state, heads of government, is accountable to its own national parliament, but not towards the European Parliament. And there one has a certain democratic gap. You have national parliaments that can control national governmental leaders, but those national governmental leaders do not necessarily define the outcome of what's happening in the consensus building around the European Council table. And at the European level, where this decision-taking, consensus building is taking place, you do not have a player that can sanction, that can hold the European Council as such accountable. Okay. Bottom line, I would say, we are again confronted here in European Council decision-making with the weak points of intergovernmentalism that were at the very basis for the creation of the European Community method in the 1950s. And so we have almost gone in full circle now that the European Council is becoming more and more dominant in European Union decision-making. Finally, I've added here on the slide that you currently see a number of quotes from prominent members of the European Parliament who have tried to characterize, to typify the European Council. And so, liberal leader in the European Council, in the European Parliament, former Belgian Prime Minister Guy Verhofstadt, when he speaks about the European Council, he speaks about a syndicate of national interests, which is, in a certain sense, a very accurate characterization of the European Council. Martin Schulz, current president of the European Parliament, has spoken on many occasions actually about a return to the Congress of Vienna system, which would really be a step back rather than a step forward in the unification of our continent. But these characterizations, these typifications of the European Council, I give them here more as food for thought, food for further discussion, if you wish to think about what is the precise political nature of such European councils. In case you would like to get further guidance on what is the functioning and what are the political problems and the legal aspects of European Council meetings, I can advise two very good books, both, by the way, prepared here at the Vrije Universiteit Brussel as doctoral dissertations. One was defended even this year, has come out as a book. It's Frederik Eggermond's dissertation entitled Changing Role of the European Council in the Institutional Framework of the European Union, and it already includes also the changes made by the Treaty of Lisbon. And then a little bit of an older work by Jan Werts, who is a very well-known journalist of European Union matters, has followed many European Council sessions, and he gives a fascinating presentation of these European Council meetings in his book of 2008. So I just want to thank you for your attention. I hope this helps to clarify a little bit functioning of the European Council. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me on the address that you see on the slide. Thank you.
Thanks. So now we are going to move to the second part of the webinar, the Council of the European Union. So the main objective of this part is to give you a background so you become familiar with the organization, tasks, and work of the Council of the European Union. And in order to do so, we are going to cover 6 parts. The first one is a quick historical overview of the development of the Council. Then we are going to look into the role of the Council, then composition, organization, functioning, and within the functioning we are going to cover mainly the decision-making process, the preparation of decisions, and then the actual voting. And at the end we are going to conclude with the support role of the Council Secretariat. So the historical overview. The first mentioning of the Council was already in the Paris Treaty of 1951 that established the European Coal and Steel Community, and then there was a special Council of Ministers established within this treaty to counterbalance the high authority, which was back then the supranational institution within the community, now the equivalent of the European Commission. The original council had quite limited functions because it could make decisions only as far as they were falling outside of the domain of coal and steel, but because the community dealt in 99% of their tasks with these issues, the role of the council was quite small. Then we had the Rome treaties in 1957 that established two new communities, European Economic Community and the Euratom, the European Atomic Energy Community, and both communities had their respective councils. Here, the role of the councils was more enhanced comparing to the Economic Coal and Steel Community, mainly because the European Economic Community had also much broader functions and areas that it covered. Because we had three communities and each of them had a different independent from each other institutions whose roles were more or less the same. In 1967, the so-called merger treaty entered into force, and it merged, as the name says, the independent institutions of the three communities, and since then there was a single council of the European communities. The current name, the Council of the European Union, or the Council of Ministers, comes from 1993, which was a sort of natural consequence of the Maastricht Treaty, which established the European Union, and therefore the name was also changed. The current order is established in the Lisbon Treaty from 2009, and today I'm going to focus the presentation on the order that currently exists. If anyone is interested to go directly into the treaty, the Council is covered by the Treaty on the European Union in Title 3 that covers all EU institutions, and in Article 16, which precisely refers to the Council of the European Union. Now, the role. If there was one thing that would describe the Council of the European Union, that would be that this is the main EU decision-making body. If we, for example, describe the European Commission as the guardian of the treaty, the European Parliament is the voice of the citizens, the Council of the European Union is the main decision-making body. Although over the years, the development of the Council, especially when it comes to its legislative and budgetary functions, has been diminished comparing to the increasing role of the European Parliament. When it comes to the legislative functions, the Council of the European Union, in most cases, precisely with the European Parliament, is responsible for passing EU legislation, that is regulations, directives, and decisions. And most of these legislative acts are currently passed within the so-called ordinary legislative procedure, which gives quite strong powers to the European Parliament, and I'm going to refer to that in a moment. Then we have budgetary functions, which are also shared with the European Parliament, especially in this respect, the Treaty of Lisbon increased the role of the European Parliament, and since 2009, the European Parliament has the same powers to adopt the budget as the Council of the European Union regarding all expenditure. Prior to the Lisbon Treaty, this equal footing was only for so-called obligatory expenses, but now it is for all expenses. Then the Council of the European Union also has very strong coordination powers, especially when it comes to coordination of economic policies. This is also a sort of traditional role of the Council of the European Union, that ministers meet and coordinate the national policies to achieve the common goals. Then the Council also is responsible for the development of the common foreign and security policy. This is quite an interesting role because the common foreign and security policy, because it's a policy that falls outside of the old community method. The role of the Council of Ministers when it comes to the common foreign and security policy is organization, and then the voting is slightly different, and I will speak about that as well. And then the last role is adoption of agreements with third countries in international organizations. So, for example, if there is an agreement, a partnership and cooperation agreement or a trade agreement being negotiated with the third country, then at the end it always has to come to the Council of the European Union, who votes on it and adopts it. How the Council is actually composed. In the Council, because it's an intergovernmental institution, representatives of member states are representing the countries. They are at ministerial level. It's a different minister depending on the issue that is being discussed. But what's important is these ministers sitting in the Council and voting in the Council, they commit their governments. So, for example, if they vote for a certain proposal and the proposal is passed, then they cannot go back and say, actually we changed our mind because the minister didn't follow, for example, the instructions. This doesn't matter. The minister votes on behalf of the member state and commits their government. As I said, different ministers come to Brussels for the meetings of the Council depending on the issue that is being discussed. Currently, we have 10 different configurations. The number of configurations has changed over the years. In the 90s, there were 22 of them. Then the number was consequently decreased, and since the Lisbon Treaty, we have 10 configurations. The first one is General Affairs Council, which deals with overall policy issues, but also cross-cutting issues that would fall under different policy areas. We have Foreign Affairs Council that deals with external relations, so the common foreign and security policy, but also, for example, development policy or humanitarian affairs policy. We have Economic and Financial Affairs configuration that consists of ministers of economic and financial affairs, depending on the issue that is being discussed. Then we have Agriculture and Fisheries configuration. This is one of the oldest in the Council. Here, depending on the issue that is discussed, it can be ministers responsible for agriculture, for fisheries, but also for food safety, for veterinary issues, for public health matters. It also depends on the internal organization of member states, which minister covers which issue. We have Justice and Home Affairs, which brings again, depending on the issue, either justice or internal affairs ministers. This configuration also deals with civil protection issues that sometimes may fall under other ministers than these two. Then the next configuration is employment, social policy, health, and consumer affairs. And here, respective ministers dealing with these issues in member states come to Brussels. We have then competitiveness and then transport, telecommunications, and energy configurations. These two were created in 2002. They are quite new ones, and they deal with the issues as in the headings. Then we have the environment configuration consisting of environmental ministers, and the last one is education, youth, culture, and sport. These configurations meet with different frequency. For example, the environmental Council meets 4 times a year, then Transport, Telecommunication, and Energy every second month. Then, for example, Foreign Affairs Council can meet even more frequently depending on the developments on the international arena and what's the actual need. You will see that there is an exclamation mark next to the Foreign Affairs configuration. That's because there is, as I said, 2 sort of organizations and then functioning of the Council of the European Union, depending on the matters discussed. And one would fall under the from 1 to 10, except for 2. And then the second sort of organization and functioning would be for foreign affairs only. And now when I discuss the organization and functioning, I will first give examples how it works for these 9, except for foreign affairs, and then how this exception works for foreign affairs, because it's quite different. So for all except for foreign affairs, there is a very important role of the presidency. So each member state holds a 6-month presidency. The order of the presidencies for the next many years has been established some time ago in 2007. So currently we have a Danish presidency. Then we are going in the second half of the year have Cyprus presidency, next year Ireland, and then Greece, and so on. And each member state during this 6-month period takes the responsibility of leading discussions in the Council, the intergovernmental discussions. The role of the presidencies are regard different issues. First of all, Presidency convene meetings of the Council. There are three situations when the meeting of the Council can be convened on the own initiative of the Presidency, so if the Presidency decides so, on the request of at least one of the EU member states, and on the request of the European Commission. Then, once the meeting is convened, it is chaired by the Presidency. The Presidency sets up agendas before the meetings and distributes reports after the meetings. It also negotiates compromises before and during the meetings to achieve agreement. And also in the longer term, it sets up the whole work plan for the whole duration of its presidency. What's also important that for the purpose of continuity and consistency, there is a group of 3 presidencies who work together, the previous, the current, and the next one, who work together to have a more longer term vision on the work of each configurations of the Council. All deliberations since the Lisbon Treaty and voting since the Lisbon Treaty are in public, but this refers only to the issues that are related to adopting legislative acts or if there are general public debates. And then all these debates and the voting on legislative acts can be followed online. Here you have the link video.concilium.europa.eu, where you can click on different configurations. Each day it could be a different configuration, and then you can actually follow what representative of your country government is saying, what the position of your country's government is on a certain issue. Normally the Council meets in Brussels, although 3 times a year it meets in Luxembourg in April, June, and in October. And here we come to the exception on the foreign policy. On the foreign policy, the Council is not chaired by the Presidency, but it's chaired by the High Representative Vice President of the European Commission, Ms. Catherine Ashton, at the moment. And also, the discussions are not in public. However, in any case, both for the foreign policy and other issues, always after the Council there is a statement issues which outlines or provides a summary of all the discussions and all the issues that were brought to the table for that particular meeting. Then when it comes to functioning, the Council is the main decision-making body. So before the actual vote on a decision takes place, on a legislative act, on budgetary issues, on coordination issues, on approval of an international agreement, and so on, there must be a decision first prepared. And the actual voting is preceded sometimes by very lengthy discussions at a more working level. So first, there is a proposal for a legislative act, for example, which comes from the European Commission. Then this proposal is discussed in the Council in the working groups. There is something like 150 working groups in the Council dealing with many different issues, and each of them are chaired by a Presidency representative who is an expert on this particular issue. And in working groups, a discussion takes place on a technical expert level. Then the next stage is so-called Coreper 1 or Coreper 2. These are meetings of permanent representatives of member states here in Brussels. Each EU member state has a sort of embassy that is specifically only for relations with the EU. And Coreper 2 is at level of ambassadors, so permanent representatives of a given member state to the Council, and Coreper 2 is deputy permanent representatives. Coreper 2 deals with issues, with political issues, foreign affairs, and economic issues, and Coreper 1 with all other issues. So once an issue is discussed by a working group, then it goes to permanent representatives, so at a higher level, where not technical discussion, but more political discussion takes place. And here, depending on the outcome of this discussion, the issue goes on the agenda of the Council, and here it can go as either points, so-called points A, or so-called points B. Points A are those points where there was already an agreement at Coreper 1 or Coreper 2 level, and there is no further discussion needed in the actual council. So then it's sort of like a procedural point that the council just makes a decision. It's like a rubber stamp. No further discussion takes place. And points B refer to issues where no agreement was reached at a technical and then political level in working groups and in COREPER. And here, more discussion is needed at the actual council meeting before the voting takes place. And here we have council in different configurations, but what's important is once the decision is being taken, the configurations are not mentioned, it just says this is council decision. As you can see below here, there is a presidency because presidency is in the lead for driving the discussion, for negotiating different positions to reach the final agreement. And then below you have European Commission, which proposes certain legislative or budgetary issues, and then it sits in the council, but only, and it can take the floor, but it only expresses its point of view. It doesn't take part in the actual voting and decision making. And then, when it comes to foreign affairs, it's slightly different. Here, those differences are marked with the pink color. So the proposal when it comes to the common foreign and security policy is not done by the Commission, but by either 27 member states or the High Representative Vice President of the Commission, Ms. Ashton. But High Representative Vice President of the Commission must always seek advice of the European Commission. Then it goes to working groups. Then we have additional layer, which is called Political and Security Committee. These are sort of advisors assigned by permanent representations of member states in Brussels, specifically covering and having expertise in foreign relations. So this is an additional layer to have this expertise specifically on foreign relations added. And then we have COREPER 2 deals with foreign affairs, again points A or B, and then Foreign Affairs Council. What's also different is that here, it's not the presidency that chairs throughout the process. In fact, the presidency chairs only in COREPER 2. And then in working groups and in PSC, we have the European External Action Service, who falls under the High Representative Vice President, who chair these two elements. And here, the EAS has permanent chairs of these groups, so they do not change every 6 months like the presidency does. And then the Foreign Affairs Council is not chaired by the presidency either. It's chaired by the High Representative Vice President of the European Commission. And this chairmanship of the working groups, PSC, and of the Foreign Affairs Council has been introduced by the Lisbon Treaty. Before that, it was also a presidency. And here, when it comes to foreign policy, the role of the European Commission and the European Parliament is also limited comparing to the role in other areas. Then the actual voting. So the general rule is qualified majority voting. It has developed significantly since the first creations of the first councils. At the beginning, in the 50s and the 60s, the councils took decisions mainly based on unanimity, which led in 1965 to the so-called empty chair crisis, where France, over different agricultural issues, decided not to participate in the council meetings, and because consensus was required, it was not possible for the council to make decisions. The crisis was put to an end the following year by the so-called Luxembourg Compromise, and since then the subsequent treaties, the Single European Act, the Maastricht Treaty, Amsterdam Treaty, Nice Treaty, and then the Lisbon Treaty subsequently increased the number of areas in which qualified majority voting was used and not unanimity. There are some situations where there is simple majority voting. This is mainly on administrative issues, and also there is still unanimity in certain areas which are clearly defined by the Lisbon Treaty, for example, taxation or the use of languages by the European institutions. But qualified majority voting is a general rule. Currently, the qualified majority voting means that each the decision is approved if at least a majority of member states approve, plus at least 255 out of all 345 votes are casted. These numbers, 255 and 345 votes, come from the fact that each member state has a different number of votes depending on of its population. So, for example, bigger member states such as Germany, France, Italy, and the UK will have the highest number of votes, 29, whereas the smallest country in terms of population, Malta, will have only 3. So altogether, when we add up all the votes of all member states, is 345. So to pass a decision, it has to be 255 of these votes. And on the website of the Council, there's a voting calculator, so you can easily use it, and you can click on the member states who would be in favor, and then at the end you are going to have a result if a decision would be passed or not. And also, one member state can request that to check if the votes that were casted represent at least 62% of the total population of the European Union. If this is not the case, the decision is not passed. But this qualified majority voting is going to change as of 1st of November 2014, where a new rule is going to be introduced. So a decision to be passed will require 55% of member states, which will have to include at least 15 member states, and they will have to represent at least 65% of the population. So it's not only a number of member states, a number of votes, but also the size of member states voting in favor, who is going to represent the population. And here again, the exception concerning the foreign policy. Here a general rule is unanimity. In certain cases, decisions are based also on qualified majority voting, but the general rule is that there must be consensus of member states. And here you have a quite intense chart of the ordinary legislative procedure, so the most frequent procedure to pass legislative act and also to approve the budget. And here in the elements marked with yellow color, you can see the role of the Council. So in these yellow elements, you can see where the actual preparation of decisions, the negotiations, the voting takes place. So you'll have the first reading, the second reading, the conciliation procedure, and here you can see where actually the Council comes into force. And you can find this diagram under this link. Maybe then it's going to be bigger and a little bit clearer. And finally, the Council Secretariat. The Council Secretariat supports the presidency and also the work and the decision-making of the Council itself. It's headed by the Secretary General, and its main role is to assist the presidency and the member states. And here, it has two groups of tasks. The first one is more traditional group, organizing, coordinating, and ensuring coherence. And this basically means planning, convening, and assisting when meetings of the Council in working groups, different configurations, and so on take place, providing all the necessary documents for each meeting, ensuring that there is translation, taking minutes, distributing reports. So this is really a support to the actual running of the Council. And then it also acts as a legal advisor and political counselor to the EU presidency. So if there are any issues that pose any questions on the legality on certain measures vis-à-vis the treaty and its provisions, then the Council Secretariat has its own legal service, which in such case provides interpretation of provisions and can advise what's the best solution in a certain situation. And more information can be found under the website on the website of the Council, which is organized both in terms of different policies, organization, functioning. It also has all the links to the documents of different Council configurations, the decisions that were made, press releases after the meetings, also the video live streaming of the Council meetings. Thank you.
Doja, thank you very much indeed, and also to Yuri as well. We've had an elaborate series of chats going on at the same time, which is wonderful to see. It shows, I think, in many ways, not just the complications with regards to the names of these entities, as we've seen, but the intricacies of the procedures by which these entities operate as well. So thank you very much for that to both of our speakers. As I said before, it was a good instance of the flexibility of the webinar format, something that we're getting very used to here at the IES. If you would like to continue with the chat, now's the time to type in more questions. But if you would like also the opportunity simply to press the raised hand button under the participant square on the left-hand side of your screen to ask Gosha here, as I said before, live in the studio questions, now is the time to do that. So I'll just give you a minute or two to see if those sorts of questions want to arise. I don't see any particular query at this point. In which case, I'd like to thank you all for gathering for the second of these webinars, and just finish up by reminding you that we have two more in the following weeks. Next week, of course, on the European Parliament, and then the final week on the 30th of May on the decision-making methods, which very much accompany these. In addition, of course, you can look at the online EU modules presented by the IES, divided across 5 substantive areas: European history, as you can see, European institutions, again, our favorite, decision-making, and 2 other complementary topics: EU law and EU information sources, available online from the IES for the low fee. And who's going to put a price on knowledge. So thank you very much indeed. It was wonderful to welcome you all in our virtual community, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you very much.